Our opening words this morning are by Tanya Markey. It is a wonder and a mystery that our paths have crossed, that in the immensity of time and the vastness of space, we coincide here. I am in awe in the ways in which our lives intersect and intertwine, and the beauty we create when we gather. May our coming together make us more compassionate, more just, more caring, and more loving. May our hearts and minds be open to this offering. I am so glad you are here. Let us worship. Let us marvel at the miracle of being here right now and the mystery that has brought us together.
Please join me in the words for our chalice lighting. Oh, I didn't do my job. I was supposed to like that. I was supposed to do that. We kindle this flame to remind ourselves of the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. Good morning, and Happy New Year to each of you here in the sanctuary, and to those of you who are joining us online. Welcome to Sunday morning worship at the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Burlington. I'd like to welcome our guest minister, Reverend Erica Barron. She's been a congregational consultant with the New England region of Unitarian Universalist Association since fall of 2019. Previously, she served as a parish minister in Rutland, Vermont, Bennington, Vermont, and Kingston, New York. She grew up in Essex, Vermont, and now lives in Malden, Massachusetts with her wife and son. We are so glad to have you here in the pulpit this morning. I'm Warren Baker, a member of the Worship Associate team. With respiratory illness in full swing, we encourage you to wear masking in the meeting house. We are happy that you are here. We welcome you to the shared work. I'm going to start that over. I haven't edited my notes and I didn't follow them. We are happy that you're here. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins, sexualities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. We hope that you will experience connection, compassion, and the feeling of coming home. We welcome you to the shared work of building beloved community and making meaning in our lives. This community is guided by a commitment to each other and to our shared values of love, compassion, equality, service, and justice. And so we welcome all who are welcoming. We acknowledge that this meeting house and its 4 buildings sit on the unceded ancestral lands of the original inhabitants, the Western Abenaki people. We strive to be good stewards of this land and the lake it adjoins. For the order of service, you can scan the QR code in the front of the hymnal, and if you're joining us streaming, you can click the live stream service tab for the order of service. In the pews, we have an information card that you can fill out to put us in touch with you. And on the website, see the New to Our Community tab for the same purpose. If this is your first or second time here, would you be willing to raise your hand so that we can offer you a special welcome? Welcome. We have welcome ambassadors here with whom you can speak after the service and who will answer your questions about Unitarian Universalism, the worship service, and our society. Today they are Betsy Thayer and Susan Ogden. Would you two please rise and be recognized? There they are. Welcome, ambassadors. Thank you. And thank you to all the people whose work behind the scenes make this service possible. You'll see their names toward the end of the order of service. I have 3 announcements. Today is the first Sunday of the month and of the new year. Beginning this month, Family Chapel is returning to our faith development programming. This means that on the first Sunday of each month, families begin the Sunday service together in the community room downstairs. Once family chapel concludes and the children have gone to their classes, parents will return here to the meeting house for the sanctuary for the rest of the service. After this morning's service, and beginning around 11:30, Reverend Erica will facilitate a Q&A session here in the sanctuary for anyone interested in talking about an array of topics, including current happenings within Unitarian Universalism, how things are going for the congregation halfway through the first year of a new ministry, how you are dealing with the tragic shooting a month and a half ago of the 3 Palestinian college students in Burlington, or questions that arise from Reverend Erica's sermon. And lastly, on behalf of all of us, I want to recognize a long-term member of our community, Jean Ashley, who will turn 101 Saturday. Yeah. And who joins the Sunday service online. I invite all to sign the birthday card that Hope Baker Carr made. It'll be up front here on your way out of the service, and then down in the community room during coffee hour. Now, Jean? Hi, Jean. I couldn't possibly let this moment pass when we have a veritable choir of voices here to sing you a happy birthday in advance of your extraordinarily marvelous 101st birthday. Sound like a plan? Okay, everyone, please join me. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jean. Happy birthday to you. Marvelous. Whatever it took for you to get here, wherever you've come from, wherever you are, and whatever burdens and joys that you're carrying, you are welcome here. Let us worship together.
I'd like to invite you to stand with me in body or spirit as we sing our opening song together. If the song is not familiar to you, we're going to sing it through a couple of times. It goes like this. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. One more time. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around attend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. And it is time now. this time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. One more time. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Thank you. Please be seated.
In a moment, I am going to lead you in a meditation about how your body connects to the earth. If at any time this meditation is not working for you, you can find your own way to reflect on our planet home and your connection to it. So first, I invite you to find a comfortable position. And surprise, surprise, notice your breathing. Yes. You don't have to change it in any way. Just notice the breath moving through your body. Now bring your attention to the places where your body is being supported by gravity. So that might be the seat of your chair or your pew, or your feet on the ground, wherever your body is touching something that is touching something that is eventually touching the ground. Notice the way you are held by the gravity of the earth. Feel that connection to the planet, the stability of its physical presence. Remember that the earth is always holding you, no matter what. Whatever else may be happening in your life, the joy, the sorrow, the confusion, the excitement, the overwhelm, you are always held close to this planet. Rest in the assurance of that hold for another moment. Then gently bring your awareness back to this gathered body, here and online, and our time together. Blessed be.
With this next song, I was hoping that we could maybe become a choir together. If I could teach you a couple of parts that we can start to sing, and you can choose whichever one feels good for you and for your voice. And each part is only 3 notes. The first one is a little bit of a low part, and it goes like this. It's just the word rise. Rise. 3, 4. Rise. The next part is these 3 notes like this. Rise. 3, 4. Rise. And those 2 parts together sound like this. 3, 4. Rise. 3, 4. Rise. And on top of that, there's a melody that goes like this. Rise. And rise. And whatever octave works for you. Rise. So here's the first part. And rise. Add the second part. Rise. rise at the third part. Rise, rise, humbly hearted, rise, won't be divided, rise, with Spirit to guide us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise. All of the children rise, elders with wisdom rise, ancestors surround us, rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise up from the wreckage, rise with tears and with courage, rise, fighting for life, we rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. Help me out. We rise, humbly hearted, rise, won't be divided, rise, with Spirit to guide us, rise. Sing that one more time, rise, rise, humbly hearted, rise, won't be divided, rise, with Spirit to guide us, rise. Thank you for singing with me.
Spiritual practices come in many forms during our Sunday service: generosity, spoken meditation, stillness, and music. Now each of us will have the chance to enter the communal practices to which we are drawn. As a justice-seeking spiritual community, our generosity practice includes sharing half of the offering each Sunday. Offerings this month will be shared with a fund established to support Hisham Awartani, one of the young Palestinian men shot in Burlington November 25th, leaving him paralyzed from the chest down. His family has established a GoFundMe to help cover the costs associated with his recovery, including long and uncertain rehabilitation needs, cost of care and adaptive living needs, and, as his family writes, providing Hisham with what he needs to enable him to change the world for the good, as we know he will.
Let us join together in a spirit of prayer and meditation. Let us quiet our minds, open our hearts, and release our fears to the love that is always available to us. Spirit of life and love, we begin with gratitude to be breathing in this moment. Our bodies, some ragged, some energized, brought us to this place that we might be together, that we might be more than the sum of our parts, that we might slow down and touch that which is greater than any one of us. Gratitude for a guest who brings a good preaching word, who is not really a guest, but is someone coming to one of their many homes that sustain her. May all whose hearts are breaking know as true that they are lovingly witnessed and held in this circle of care. May all who experience joy that sparks, nearly bursting their hearts, know that they, too, are held and witnessed and celebrated in this circle of care. May all who live in the path of this winter storm be safe and stay warm and remain so. And I say this prayer not just for those within these sheltering walls or those who are joining us online, but those whose daytime lives and nighttime lives are out in the elements. May Tassin, Kinan, and Hisham, alongside those who love them, know more than just the comfort of their own families, but their ever-widening communities of which we consider ourselves a part. May the destruction that the Palestinian people are experiencing come to an end. May all still living hostages be released. May the violence that has taken place thus far be that tragically cannot be deleted from our communal record. May it bring about such energies that new forms of peace, otherwise thought naive, become emergently possible and worthy of the attention of the children of the generals and the prime ministers and the hidden corporate overlords, alongside the children of corrupt leaders, bringing about the necessary changes not only for peace but for justice. May this country find the courage and the tenacity to refuse any tyrant and any fascist, those on further shores and those who might be at our doorsteps. May those who turned 101 yesterday, and I'm looking at you, Jean, know the love and the appreciation of this congregation, which has been your home for over half a century. May the skiers know joy and the snowboarders too. May there be no broken bones, unintended collisions, or snapped tendons. May old or replaced knee joints remember the whoosh whoosh that brings such joy. May those whose families are experiencing the impact of addiction be held in loving embrace that leads to sobriety, that leads to becoming and staying clean. May all whose hearts are breaking know as true they are lovingly witnessed here in this circle of care. And let us spend these next few moments together in shared stillness until the chime rings, connecting with that yearning that only our hearts know. Amen.
When the music begins, we invite you to mark silently a joy, a sorrow, or a gratitude in your life by moving a stone from one of the baskets on the table, from one of the baskets onto the table, which will create a representation of our shared lives. Come forward along the outer aisles and return to your seat by the center aisle. If you have a gift to add to the offering, you may place it in one of the baskets up front, or you may make your offering online. Please come forward. Please join me in the offering dedication. With gratitude, we dedicate these gifts in the service of our mission to inspire spiritual growth, care for each other and our community, seek truth, and act for justice.
Hello, it's great to be with you. As you heard in Warren's introduction, before I was a regional staff person, I served UU congregations as a parish minister for 11 years. And in the course of that work, I often had occasion to ask people why they were Unitarian Universalists, either what had drawn them to a particular congregation, what kept them coming, what they appreciated about Unitarian Universalism. Now, of course, people have all kinds of answers to these questions because we each arrive in a particular congregation at a particular time through our individual journeys. But, as you might expect, there are answers that come up over and over again. And two of these very common responses are variations on, I love being in a community of like-minded people, and I appreciate the diversity of belief in UU congregations. Now, these two things are not necessarily opposites, but they do point to a certain tension in the experience of Unitarian Universalist congregational life that I find interesting. We have some really important things in common, and we want to leave space for the things we don't have in common. But it can be difficult to tell which things we have in common, which commonalities are important to us, the ways we differ, and the ways to honor these differences. As with so many things, the practice is a lot harder than the principle. One of the habits that lots of people and communities fall into when trying to be inclusive and unified at the same time is to allow the ways we are different to drift into the background while focusing on the things we have in common. And we do this in all kinds of ways, many of which are not really intentional or even conscious. So, for example, although diversity of belief is a central value in Unitarian Universalism, it's actually pretty uncommon for Unitarian Universalists to talk directly to each other about our individual beliefs. Sometimes we set up programs for that specific purpose, but otherwise, we kind of don't go there. Sure, we acknowledge, as your walls do, that it's okay to be atheist, agnostic, humanist, pagan, Buddhist, Christian, but we mostly engage this diversity theoretically rather than hearing each other's stories and the beliefs they've inspired in a deeper way. My dad sometimes sums up this habit of ours by saying, we UUs agree to disagree, and then we never do. I think this habit of focusing almost all of our attention on what we have in common contributes to that sense of like-mindedness that so many UUs lift up as part of what they love about our congregations. It feels really comforting and embracing for some of us, but actually not to others. Because when we don't directly talk about our differences, it can begin to feel like we don't have any. We know vaguely we have different theologies, sure, but focusing on what we have in common can lead to all sorts of assumptions that beyond our common values, we also have common preferences for things like music, food, entertainment, that we have similar lifestyles and life circumstances, and so on, that we have similar cultural ways of being. And again, that feels great and comfortable for some of us, but for others, it can feel like those part of our identities and experiences that don't match this assumed common ground aren't welcome here. Maybe tolerated, but best not spoken about directly. I want to tell you about an exercise I learned at a program about inclusion in congregations, and you are welcome to do it with me as I describe it. It can be challenging, so if you just want to listen, that's okay too. So, the first step is to make a list of 5 aspects of your identity. You can write this down on paper or keep it in your head or take notes on your phone, whatever. So 5 aspects of your identity. So things like race, ethnicity, class, gender, family role, profession, generation, etc. Okay, once you've got your list, the next step is to cross 3 things off the list. I know that doesn't feel great, but it's okay. You are not actually crossing them out of your being, just crossing them off the list for this exercise. So cross out 3. and then cross out one more, and you will be left with 1. So notice which aspect of your identity is left after you've crossed out the others. Why am I talking about this exercise, you may wonder? Or you may be thinking, this is horrible. Please stop. I'm stopping now, okay? We're moving on. But I want to lift up 2 things about this exercise. The first is that for some Unitarian Universalists, coming to the congregation actually feels like this exercise. For example, many Black, Indigenous, and people of color UUs have written about having to set aside their cultural ways of being when engaging UU spaces and communities. The book Centering, edited by Mitra Ranama, is a collection of essays by UU's ministers of color reflecting on their experiences. I highly recommend the whole book, but I'm going to read you 2 brief things from that book. So Derek Jackson, who is a Black UU minister, says, "The intellectualism in Unitarian Universalism comes with a culture of stillness. We are expected to sit quietly in our seats, listen intently with no emotion on our faces, no movement in our bodies. We are supposed to wait until after the service to express ourselves. I grew up in a culture of engagement. We had permission to respond to the service, to say amen when we were moved by the words or the music, to clap our hands and smile and nod our heads whenever the Spirit moved us. I have had to learn to restrain myself in UU circles, which distances me from worship." And in the same book, Manish Mishra Marzetti, who is a Hindu UU minister of Indian descent, says, "Assumptions kick in with Asian Americans, and what happens is the unspoken assumption that, well, you're practically like us. Then the practically part gets glossed over. You are just like us. There's a lot that's lost." Okay, second thing about this exercise. The person who taught it to me said that what's left on your list when you've crossed everything else out, that last identity, tends to be the identity that feels most under threat in the situation in which you do the exercise. So we are holding tightest, right, to the thing that we are most afraid is going to be taken away or deemed unwelcome. So what that means is that while out there, externally, we may hide or minimize some aspects of our identities to fit in, internally, we feel the effects of that, the injustice and the hurt of being erased. Let me tell you a story about the problems of assuming sameness among us. When I was in college at the University of Massachusetts, I belonged to the UU Society of Amherst. Now, being the UU-obsessed future minister that I was, I didn't just attend this congregation. I jumped in with both feet. And my senior years, I was on the board. I was also on a bunch of committees. I did my college-required internship with the Social Justice Committee. I taught religious education, all of the things. And one of the years I was on the board, there was a particular approach to fundraising and congregational pledging that was taking the UU world by storm. You may have noticed we have these fads that move through us sometimes. This was one of those, right? So a guy had written a book that had become hugely popular, and now he was going around leading workshops based on the book all over the place. And the details of the model in this story are not really important, but one of the things that he talked about in the book is that when you're going to make significant changes in a congregation, such as the way you do pledging, you should be sure that the most dedicated, active, committed members of the congregation are on board with this change, because you're sunk before you've even begun if they're not. We could talk about democratic process and whatever, but this was the model at the time, right? Okay, so then he said that research shows that the more people are committed to their congregations, the higher percentage of their income they donate to their congregations, which is true. And it makes sense, right? Like, the more important congregational life is to you, the higher a priority it is in your life, the higher a financial priority it's going to tend to be. Then he concluded that in order to make sure that the central members of the congregation supported any change the leaders wanted to make, they should look at everyone who had pledged more than $1,000 in the previous year and have conversation with those people. Now, I was not poor by any stretch of the imagination at the time of this story. In fact, my parents were supporting the total cost of tuition, room, and board at UMass at the time. I was also working part-time at the campus dining hall, which I do not recommend. But the money that I directly had access to and could spend at my discretion was pretty limited, basically somewhere around 10 hours a week of minimum wage. And out of that money, since it wasn't actually how I was getting my basic needs met, I contributed a pretty high percentage to the congregation. I don't remember exactly, but I know it was more than 10%, and I know that it did not come close to $1,000 a year. So this idea that you could tell who was really active in a congregation by who had given more than $1,000 made me mad, to put it mildly. So when a group of people from my congregation, including myself, went to one of these workshops, I mean, of course I went, that's who I was, right? I did all the things. I decided to ask the speaker, the author, about it during the Q&A. So I stood up and I explained to him that I was super active in my congregation. I was, in fact, on the board. And I didn't have a lot of my own money because I was in college, so I didn't meet this threshold for a donation that indicated an important member. And he said, "Oh yes, I'm sorry, I misspoke. As a courtesy, I would of course include the board." Which, missed my point entirely, right? See, the steps in his thinking have one major assumption built in, right? So remember, the research says that people give more to their congregations the more committed they are, which is true as a percentage of their income. So the idea that we can tell who those people are by looking at the dollar amount that people pledge only works if everyone in the congregation has the same income, which we didn't. This whole experience really hurt. I could not imagine being more committed to the congregation. I mean, seriously, I did all the things. And yet, because I didn't have enough money of my own to give enough to meet this person's standard of meaningful donation, that commitment and dedication was dismissed, erased, irrelevant. I would only be included in conversations as a courtesy because I was on the board. All right. Let's let go of this idea of crossing out bits of our identities, right? You can give a little shake if that helps. Get rid of that idea. It doesn't feel good. It's not the radical welcome that we want to practice in this congregation. So let's talk about a different way of being, right? So I want to tell you next is about a way of leaning in to diversity of identity, belief, and experience and life that exists within the congregation. So this way of thinking and being in congregations comes from the work of Paula Cole-Jones. She is a Black UU laywoman who has been active in anti-racism and diversity and inclusion work within Unitarian Universalism for longer than I have been alive. She has served as a consultant to congregations and various other bodies within Unitarian Universalism. She did my job in a different region, the Central East region, for a few years. And she's also the lead organizer of the movement to add an 8th principle to the 7 about accountability and dismantling systems of oppression, which has lately morphed into a broader proposal for changes and updates in how we describe our common values. She was also on the commission that did that, right? She's great. And she's a member of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. Okay, that's who she is, Paula Cole-Jones. She has proposed a way of thinking and being in congregations that she calls the community of communities. She says that within every congregational community, there are smaller communities that gather around some commonality shared among this little community, but not universal in the whole congregation. So, for example, in her congregation, there is a group of seniors and a group of young adults. Black, Indigenous, people of color, and folks in the congregation are a community. In many congregations, the choir is a community. The parents of the kids is a community. Often congregations have a community of people active in social justice, or perhaps even a bunch of communities of people active in social justice in different ways. So there are these little communities. And Jones points out that every congregation has them. But when we focus almost all of our attention on our common ground, we don't notice these communities. And so in most congregations, they are not gathered in a formal way. And those that are, like the choir, gathers pretty formally. But we don't think of them as a community within the community necessarily. So Jones asks us to shift the frame, or switch the lens, or the filter, if you will, to recognize all the little communities that come together to form the bigger community of the whole congregation. So why? What is made possible by that shift in frame? Well, when we make note of the little communities within the big community, we make space to notice our differences. We challenge the assumption that we are all the same. In fact, thinking about the congregation this way makes it impossible to ignore that we have some key differences in life experience, identities, interests, or beliefs. Which can also remind us that these differences matter. They are not the only things that matter. Our common ground matters too. But acknowledging the presence of the little communities is the opposite of crossing out our identities to belong. It invites all the things on the list back into awareness and attention and care. Now, remember how I said that the last item on your list is often the identity that feels most stressed in a particular context? Creating opportunities for the little communities to gather is one of the best ways to relieve that stress. When we are with people who have experienced similar challenges, we can relax into that shared understanding and support each other. I also think anyone who sings will tell you that the choir is a great place to let go of stress, right? Because breathing together does things to our brains that are very helpful. Okay, back when I lived and worked in Rutland, Vermont, I belonged to this group that was working on racial justice in the community. It was a pretty small group. It was like, we were just getting started. There's stuff going on here. We should work on it. And it was majority Black from the beginning, but at some point, after a few months, there was a conflict in the group, and I became the only white person left in the group. And at the next meeting, the style of conversation was radically different. We were like in a whole other way of talking to each other. I can't remember all the details now, but I do remember that the conversation was a lot less linear and a lot more emotionally expressive. I kind of remember feeling like I was holding on as something very fast was moving, and I was just trying to stay in it. And by the time our meeting was over, we're talking like 90 minutes at the most. This is not an all-day meeting. I was completely exhausted. And I realized this was because I was participating in a conversation that was in a radically different style than I was used to. And if I thought about that for a bit, I realized that that means that everyone else in the group was doing what I was doing that day all the rest of the time. All of our previous meetings, they had been functioning in a style that was not natural to them. Of course, they had a lot more practice in that than I did, but that sort of sense of dislocation, right, they were experiencing every previous meeting. Now, there are like a million variations on this story, of course, all the ways that our little communities are different in style and culture and ways of being. When we intentionally create opportunities for our little communities to gather, we make sure that everyone has some place in the congregation that feels like home, where the way they are most comfortable is the way the group functions. Without this, some of us experience that comfort of our learned style almost all of the time, and other people never do. So an abundance of little communities allows everyone to have some place they can experience deep belonging. About a decade ago, novelist Veronica Roth published a series of books. The first one was called Divergent. They're about a dystopian future society where people belong to one of 5 distinct factions. They live together, they work together, they do everything together. They only interact with other factions when it's absolutely necessary, right? So at one point in the story, the main character goes to visit the faction called Amity, whose principal value is peace. And while she's there, she gets to witness the Amity community make a decision. So, in the book, right, this happens outside on a gorgeous summer day in a huge field, and there's a lot of people, and they're all basically picnicking in this field, and then they get together in little groups, right, and then the little group will talk and figure out what it thinks, and then send a person to a slightly bigger group, and there's still a number of those because there's, the whole faction, whatever. Eventually, the stream comes to one group that represents everybody, and they make a decision, and that's how the decision gets made. So this is the scene that I imagine in my head, even though we don't actually have a gorgeous lawn. Well, you all do, but we don't necessarily make decisions on the gorgeous lawn. But this is the scene that comes to mind when I imagine the decision-making process that Paula Cole-Jones describes when she talks about the decision-making application of the community of communities idea. So, she suggests that when there is an issue of major importance to the congregation, the discussion happens first in the little communities. There's a lot of reasons for this, one of which is that smaller group conversations can be structured in a way that everyone gets to speak, whereas this almost never happens in the whole congregation all-together meeting. So that also means that everybody gets to be heard and have their ideas considered. Then each little community chooses a representative to speak for the group's perspective and concerns in a gathering of people from each of the little communities. Often in congregations, when we become aware of the differences in perspective within the congregation, what we do in response is invite people from our little communities into leadership in some way, right? Such as when I was in college, being the young adult representative on the board of trustees. And yes, it is absolutely important for congregational boards and other decision-making bodies to be diverse in many ways. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee that the chosen person is in deep relationship to others within that community. When I was in college, for example, people used to ask me what should we do for young adult worship? And I was like, I am the only person I know who gets up and comes to your normal service because I love it so much. I am not the person you need to ask. I don't know how to do jazz worship. I am a classical musician and I come on Sunday morning, right? Okay. And when the nominating committee or the board or whoever it is chooses the person to invite, that doesn't necessarily mean the little community is happy with that person representing their views. At the most extreme version of this practice we call tokenism, because it means inviting a token person of a little community into a position where they don't actually have the ability to make meaningful change, but where their presence lends some air of credibility to the group in charge. Okay, but Jones points out that if we allow the little communities to choose their own representative into a larger conversation, that will avoid some of these pitfalls. The agency of choosing who will speak for the group belongs to the group. And then that person who represents that group knows they have the group's support and has a specific way of knowing the will of that group to bring to the larger discussion, right? We often leave that mechanism out too. You're just supposed to know what every young adult or what every person of color thinks. But in this way, we've structured the conversation so you can actually do that in a more meaningful way. Okay, now depending on the question at hand and its complexity, there might be conversations that move back and forth between the little communities and the circle of representatives a few times, or 20 times, depending on how complex it is. And as you've probably noticed, depending on the specific circumstance, this is likely to take a lot longer than the wide open whole congregation conversation that is how we often make our decisions. But it will mean that the discussion includes everyone's voice, rather than including only those people who are confident and assertive enough to speak in front of the whole congregation. Also those people who can generate their thoughts fast enough to get the microphone before the meeting ends, right? And it will mean that all of the different little communities can have their concerns addressed in the process and the outcome. So the practice that I see at the heart of the Community of Communities model is the practice of solidarity. So solidarity is a cooperation between different groups of people, which has a different flavor from cooperation between individuals. So when we practice solidarity, we remain grounded in our own identities and communities of common identity, and we understand that the well-being of our little community is bound up in the well-being of all the other little communities. History is full of examples of the power of radical solidarity. I could, spend all day telling you about them. I'm just going to talk about two. So, one is the story of lesbians and gays support the miners, or LGSM, miners here meaning people who are in mines, not people who are under 18, miners, an organization in Britain in the 1980s. So, 1980s, lesbians and gays are themselves a very marginalized group. Also, the mine workers in Britain were on an extended strike across the country, and they needed financial, political, and moral support. So a group of gay and lesbian people formed LGSM to raise money and support for the miners, and they did this very effectively, which a couple of years later led to the miners' union becoming a key ally in the struggle for LGBT rights in Britain. In fact, they led the Pride Parade, the following year. So another example is the Rainbow Coalition in Chicago in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The key organizer in this effort was Fred Hampton, a member of the Black Panther Party, who understood the potential for a coalition of all the city's different communities that experienced racial and/or economic oppression to make powerful change. So he brought together the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, who were Puerto Rican, Chicagoans, and the Young Patriots, who were poor white migrants to Chicago from Appalachia. Now, these are not three groups that necessarily thought they had common cause, right? But the practice of radical solidarity will point out they actually do. These three groups of people represent a lot of the population of Chicago who are economically and racially marginalized, and if you put them all together, they have a lot of political power. The practice of solidarity is radically inclusive because it requires us to lean into our differences as we engage common commitments and values. Rather than ignoring our different perspectives and experiences, we welcome them in and lift them up. We can belong both to the little communities and to the larger community of solidarity at the same time, which is helpful because a lot of us would belong to more than one of the little communities as well. And we don't have to cross out any part of ourselves to find a way to belong. So I invite us to bring all of ourselves to this gathered body, and may we find the smaller communities of deep belonging and recognition. May we come together in solidarity to create together the congregation, the community, and the world, where all of our differences shine in one beloved community of justice, compassion, love, and liberation. May it be so.
Invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing together hymn number 1017 in the teal hymnal. We are building a new way. Hymn number 1017. We are building a new way. are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. God, with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, this world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way.
Please join me in the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with the world until we are together again. So friends, go forth into the world, standing strong in all of your identities and finding the path to radical solidarity within the congregation and out in the community. May it be so. Blessed be.
I just want to thank Reverend Erica Barron for coming. This is part of the way that the UUA is taking care of us. I just want to say that out loud. I also want to remind you, there is a birthday card for Jean Ashley. If you can sign it, that would be great before you move anywhere around. And there was something, oh, and 11:30, back here, Q&A with Reverend Erica. Yay.